Today's top story from the perspective of someone who's there.
You are looking live.
This just in.
Not my beat.
Of course, you know Ben, the Commanders beat reporter for The Athletic. Standig, what's up, my guy? How are you?
Craig, I am doing well. Thanks for having me. It's nice to finally get past the draft and remember what it's like to sleep for more than a few hours, so pretty happy.
I was going to ask, because I definitely was pretty dead earlier in the week, and kind of today I was like, oh, I feel alive again. Like, kind of. I'm not back to 100%, but I know how being on the beat is for the draft itself, being out there in Ashburn. Do you, like, what percent is Ben Standig Wednesday after the draft?
Well, I don't think I've been over 60% in years at this point, but yeah, I mean, again, somewhat first world problems. Nobody cry a river of tears for me or my colleagues, but yeah, I mean, obviously the drafts are late nights, and in this case, when you have 6 picks in the first 100. My place wants a lot of stuff on a lot of the early picks, so there's a lot to do. But I would say in general, and this applies for really all of us, the Monday after the draft, I genuinely would say is the first time since the Dan Snyder harassment stories, popped up for real back in the summer of 2020. It's the first time I think we've all been able to take a legit breath since then, because it's been, as we know, one thing after another. And even after Josh Harris bought the team, it was immediately on to the season. And then it became, who's he going to hire a GM and coach? And they signed 800 free agents. So, yeah, it actually Monday kind of was a monumental moment in terms of not just covering this team, but following it, talking about it. I think it's a real thing.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. I was actually talking with our boss earlier today about this, and we're kind of now looking ahead. It's like, what are we going to talk about the next couple of months? And last year, there was still the sale to talk about, and it dominated so much of the conversation. Is like, how difficult was Dan going to be on the way out? Like, could the Harris group get it across the finish line? By this point, I think we knew, or we were getting close to knowing, that it was definitely going to be Harris. So it's definitely weird to just kind of wake up and be like, oh, we kind of get a couple weeks here till rookie minicamp. Of course, there's no lack of excitement, though. Jaden Daniels, ultimately the pick at 2. As people start talking a little bit more now that everything's over, have you learned anything more about the Commanders' pursuit of Daniels and ultimately why they settled on him at 2 and how difficult or not of a decision it was for them?
Well, I mean, Peters, after all this silence, after all this speculation, tells us after the draft, oh, yeah, we kind of knew for a while. It's like, buddy, come on. Get in the front, somebody a bone here to have us all stand down a little bit. Yeah, I mean, look, they did their homework. And, if you're starting with sort of last year's tape, it's going to be pretty hard to not fall for Daniels. I in talking to some different people around the league before the draft and then certainly after, everybody seems to point to that Florida game, the one that Daniels himself mentioned when he was asked as a response to something Adam Peters said, like, what's it like to take the soul out of a defense, and he points specifically to that Florida game last year where he had just preposterous numbers. I don't know if that's the game itself that put Peters and crew over the top, but it certainly didn't hurt the cause. He's a playmaker. I think, look, we're going to learn a lot more about him as we all go through this, but, his athleticism is the obvious part, but I think his intellect, his feel for the game, his understanding of what a defense is doing and how the play call fits in with that, I think is going to probably be a part that we'll end up talking more about going forward, or at least that's something that people have emphasized to me, over the last few days.
Ben Standig with us, of course, from The Athletic. So we can just kind of go through the picks at large here, Ben, or the picks pick by pick, I should say. Jer'Zahn Newton goes second for Washington. They couldn't believe he was still there. I was pretty surprised he was. I'm sure that you then started scouring the league, kind of asking that question as you talk to your connects around the league. How surprised were they, and what reasons do you think or why Jer'Zahn Newton fell out of the first round and to the delighted arms of Adam Peters at pick 36?
Yeah, as somebody who pays attention to things like mock drafts, I try to always get a feel for a guy like, for any of these players in terms of like where they're going to go in the first round. And I wasn't projecting Newton to Washington because, for the obvious reasons, even though I've been talking about like they're making their choices for 2024, it's still hard to say, okay, but take a defensive tackle with your second pick when you have Allen and Payne and, obviously. But when it got to the top of the second round, that I was like, you know what, I'm not going to be surprised at all if he's there because there was, not that there wasn't talk of first round possibility for some of the other players, but, at that point, all bets are off. I think people around the league, it's a little bit of a mixed bag. Like, I didn't talk to anybody who was like, what a steal. It was more like, yeah, he's good. They're not necessarily surprised he fell out of the first. He was in mock drafts generally in sort of that 28 to, starting around 28. There was some, talk about Miami at 21, but I think that was maybe a lot of they have a need. Let's fill the need for them, rather than necessarily being an accurate depiction of where his value was. So I think people like him. There's some, squatty body kind of concerns a little bit. And I don't know how much this current Jones fracture injury matters, but it's a good pick. I get totally why they did it, but it wasn't like I think, look, if Peters is happy, I don't know where he was on his board, but like in general, from the outside perspective, it wasn't like crazy that he was there at 36, but it's, hey, he's there. They like him. And they said, we're going to, go ahead, even though it's not like our biggest need in 2024.
Right. And then this is the fun part, right? We get to find out over the next bunch of years, like, was Adam Peters right to think that everyone else was nuts, or is Adam Peters the sucker here and everyone else was right to pass on him in the first round for whatever reason? That's the fun of this. And sometimes if you're Adam Peters, you drafted Trey Lance, and sometimes if you're Adam Peters, you drafted George Kittle. So hopefully, obviously for Commanders fans, it's on the Kittle side of that scale for Newton. When it comes to the what does this mean for Jon Allen question, what's your answer to that?
Yeah, I've been harping on this for a long time now because he no longer has any guaranteed money left on the last 2 years of his deal. Next year, his deal, it's like a $23 million cap hit, which is, really, relatively speaking, an unsustainable number unless he just has a completely monster season. And, last year was not his best year, probably partly because of some injuries. But, it's going to be, it does. I won't say it's a definitive answer as to whether they're looking to extend him, but whatever the odds were that was going to happen before, I think that you have to imagine that takes a hit. I mean, this is what happened with Darian Mathis, right? Ironically, they were hedging that Daron Payne wasn't going to sign an extension, so they took effectively his replacement in the second round, only for Payne to ball out and Mathis to miss the whole year. So they give Daron the extension, and now we're at the same boat. Is Jon Allen are they gonna wait? Is he gonna have a monster year? And if he does, then do you feel the need to keep him? So I wouldn't feel I'll say this: if you were looking to go buy a jersey, I wouldn't feel great about buying a 93 if you're looking to wear it beyond this season. With him being on the roster, but at the same time, we'll just have to see how they play it out. Obviously, Allen's a valuable player, so we'll have to see what they do. That's one thing I don't know what you talked about. Almost everybody that was already on the roster, we pretty much have not talked about much at all for the last 3 months, and that's not necessarily our fault. We just haven't had much time with the new regime, and every time we do, we have to talk about the quarterback and all those things. So it'll be interesting to see more what they think of Allen as a building block and a guy they would potentially want to keep.
Yeah, no, I think that the current roster thing's interesting, Ben, because they also won't talk about it. Like, you ask them, like, hey, by the way, what do you think of, that you had a chance, what do you think of St. Juice? What do you think of Forbes? What do you think of some of these guys that we would like to know more about? And they give you fairly mealy-mouthed answers because they have the competitive advantage of secrecy right now. We have no idea what they're going to run on both sides of the ball, and we won't until week one, probably. Like, we'll get some clues during the OTA period, and we'll get some clues during training camp because they have to practice. But I don't think that we're going to see like the full bloom of what they're going to do schematically beyond their base installs until week one. And then it's going to be a week by week thing of like, what other tricks do they have in their bag as they unveil them game plan by game plan. Like, it's actually, if you want to get way ahead of ourselves, like, it's the kind of thing where I call Logan sometime next January and be like, All right. Hey, we should do a film review on the season. And by the way, check out what we actually did this year because we're just going to be chasing it all season. And, if I'm them, I'm not giving up any of that as much as we want to know it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I had Fred Smoot on my podcast that went up today, and obviously defensive back and all that. And I said, hey, help me out here. They draft Mike Sanders still. He's going to be the slot corner. But then we thought Quan Martin was going to be there. But then you have Jeremy Chin, who's a safety, but maybe they're going to use him more as a linebacker. And, what do we think of obviously St. Juice, I guess, is going back outside. What do you think about Forbes? Basically, Fred, tell me what the lineup's going to look like. It's 1st and 10. They're playing the Eagles. What are we looking at? He's like, I don't know. He's like, I don't know. This is the big mystery of the whole thing. Now that we've gotten past the mystery of who's the quarterback, now it's, what's the actual team going to look like? And you're right. It's good for them, bad for us.
Yeah, Ben Standig, who, by the way, you can listen to on the Standig Room Only podcast from The Athletic, and, of course, read his work at theathletic.com or the app. It will, if you try to read it on the website, Ben, and you're on a mobile device, it'll send you to the app. I know because I do that. Back to Allen, though, real quick. I also wonder what this means for Jon this year because I like the way you phrased some things earlier where you're like, they're not drafting for 2024, but what does this mean for 2024 on some other guys that we were talking about? But with Newton, I feel like it gives Allen a chance to breathe, and it feels like he couldn't do that the last bunch of years. Do you think this could be a resurgent year for Jon Allen, or are we at a point with what he's gone through injury-wise the last couple of years and the fact that he's creeping up towards 30 that you just you reserve your optimism for somebody else?
Yeah, no, the getting a chance to breathe part is key. I said that they drafted Mathis as a hedge if Daron Payne leaves. He also was, in theory, the replacement for Matt Ioannidis, who had left at that point. Tim Settle left about that point, I think, as well.
Yep.
And those were the two primary backups. Then Mathis misses the whole year, right? And all of a sudden, there's more workload for Allen and Payne. And, it kind of carried into last year, too. Mathis missed some time, still hasn't really shown what he is. They have John Ridgeway. But, yes, with Newton, in theory, that should be a guy who allows them to rest, have more of a real rotation and not have Allen and Payne on the field for, a million percentage plays. Maybe Dan Quinn wants that, but it seems like he's more of a rotation guy. So, yeah, in theory, that should be a help. And again, Allen has 2 years left on his deal, but realistically, one way or the other, this is, I don't want to say it's the final year, but this is the big year. This is the year where it's all right, either I'm getting an extension or I'm probably getting released and I got to show the league where I'm at. So, and the fact that they drafted the defensive tackle, maybe there's some extra motivation there. So, yeah, I would imagine, assuming he's healthy, and not to say that Jon Allen isn't playing hard all the time, but just, there could be a little extra motivation this year with all those circumstances.
No doubt. And you can play a lot harder when you only have to play 65, 70% of snaps versus 85. And that's been Jon Allen's life the last couple of years. So they then trade out at 40. They pick up 50 and 53. But I'm curious, for someone who's plugged in as you around the league, what do people make of the intra-division trade thing? Because there are some fans certainly that care a lot. But do people in the league make a big deal out of the fact that they essentially give the Eagles Cooper DeJean? Obviously, they get quite a bit in return, but they allow that transaction to happen by trading in the division with Philadelphia. How big of a deal is that?
I don't think it's a huge deal. I think quarterback is where it's no chance that nobody's doing that. But, a couple years ago, Dallas and Philly made a trade in the top 15. I think that was the deal where ultimately Dallas got Micah Parsons and the Eagles got Devontae Smith, I want to say.
That sounds right.
So those things do happen. And, look, even Peters himself acknowledged, hey, I guess we'll see what happens here with because Cooper DeJean was the pick. But ultimately, you got to do what you got to do. And if they felt this is the right thing, again, that's the thing. It's not quarterback, right? So, whatever Cooper DeJean needs, it's hard to imagine he's swinging the division, right? So, and they obviously think, between the two guys they got, Sanders Still and Ben Sinnott, that, those are guys that they like. And, whether even if DeJean is, say, the best of the three, they jumped up significantly to get to 53 from one of the other picks they traded. So, it was a good move for them to get yet another top 100 pick, but it's a name that we're going to remember. It's not, sometimes these deals happen and you're like, remind yourself, who did they get? No, this one we're all going to remember because DeJean was a guy that got talked a lot about being a first-round pick. And in one of my mock draft exercises, he was actually a guy that I traded up for Washington as a versatile defensive back that I thought would work for Dan Quinn. So, yeah, it's going to be a really interesting one for sure.
What do you think Sinnott tells us about what Cliff wants to do offensively? If Peters is out there making Kyle Juszczyk comparisons, and we've seen him line up all over the place, what do you think that tells us about the offense that Cliff Kingsbury is going to run in 24 and beyond?
Well, it kind of makes me wonder. So, like, in terms of, like, the quarterback, a lot of people have asked, I'm sure you guys talked about this, that, like, how much influence does Cliff Kingsbury have on that pick? And I was always like, well, can't really be too much ultimately, right? I mean, he could be gone by next year. You can't make if let's just say they have a good year and he has a chance to be a head coach in pros or college and he leaves, you can't make a decision off of that. So off of him. So based on that and the fact that Peters is saying that Sinnott reminds him of two guys that he had in San Francisco kind of makes me think he just felt he wanted this kind of a piece. But look, I mean, they have not had, since basically Logan Thomas in 2020, they really have not had an effective pass-catching tight end on this roster in part because this Logan Thomas got banged up and, Cole Turner hasn't become a thing yet, or Marty Rogers got hurt last year and so on. So, I just think it gives them another, he's got obviously his crazy versatility that he can play fullback, that he can, be an effective pass catcher. Somebody said to me that, because, like, depending on what list you looked at, right, like Dave Brugler, our guy, had Sinnott as a fourth-round pick and, like, the sixth tight end overall. I want to say Daniel Jeremiah had him go much higher, like maybe like a top 50 player. And basically, the way somebody phrased it to me was, if you wanted a guy like Sinnott, you had to take him because he's like kind of a one-on-one almost. Like, they're just not guys who have his skill set and abilities and flexibility. So, position flexibility. So, I think I owe Ron a quarter now for using that term.
Yeah, I've been using positional versatility or just versatility in general. That's code for position flex, except for it's not a bad word.
Right. I have to wean myself off. I'll get dock myself every time I say it. But so I think it was kind of like that because, like, some people thought it was a little bit of early, but again, it's just like he's such a unique player, and the need is pretty notable. Again, they just not had much success at that spot. So I don't like it's hard to get excited when he's comparing him to Kyle Juszczyk. But at least in terms of skill set, when he's comparing him to Kittle, you're like, all right, well, let's see what happens.
Would you say, I'll come back to Coleman in a second, would you say that's the same for Luke McCaffery? Because Logan and I actually talked about that, where it feels like if you wanted a big power slot that was willing to block, and for all the other receivers that were on the board, the guys that maybe fit the profile of what they wanted both from a football and a character standpoint were getting kind of slim. They didn't have a fourth rounder. Would you say that same thing applies to, or did you have any conversations with folks around the league about Luke McCaffery being that same way of a necessary overdraft, if you even consider him an overdraft?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of that. I think that makes a lot of sense for sure. Like, every time I was doing a mock draft in that 100th pick, I kept landing on Brendan Rice, Jerry Rice's son, who obviously ended up going much later. But it was in part because I was like, all right, well, at some point I got to give them some target and somebody with some size. And I just kind of kept landing on him. He just, at least, Dane's draft guide ends up being sort of like a Bible almost last couple of weeks. And he had Rice higher than McCaffrey, I want to say so. But yeah, no, when you don't have a fourth round pick, when you want a specific skill set and there's just not a ton of them, then yeah, sometimes you have to overdraft. I mean, we've all, this is maybe the one place where us fantasy footballers can relate to an NFL situation. Sometimes you just have to do that. So yeah, I mean, look, McCaffrey's got some good size, a little under 6'2". His 3-cone and quick bursts off the line really stood out among his peers. And needless to say, Peters is going to have more insight into him than probably most teams in the league other than the 49ers because he was just around. So, I get it. Even if it was a little bit of an overdraft, obviously, hopefully for them it works out. But, yeah, I understand why they did it. And without a fourth, they probably felt, hey, if we want to do this, we have to do it now.
And then last but not least, we're going to talk to someone who covered Brandon Coleman at TCU coming up at 5:30. But, Ben, as you've had conversations with folks talking about Coleman, the 78th pick, of course, for Washington, some people say he's a guard. Some people say he's a tackle. It seems like they're going to try him at tackle. What are folks around the league making of that idea?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, those who put him at guard, they're like, look, it's not that he can't play tackle. I just think his best path going forward is at guard. Obviously, they're willing to see this play out. He's a huge guy, very athletic. He has, an insane amount of snaps having playing left tackle in college. So it's not like, that was one of the reasons I kind of questioned the idea of them moving into the first round for a tackle, because a guy like Tyler Guyton, a lot of upside, but he has barely played in college, whereas Coleman has, 1,400, 1,500, 1,600 snaps under his belt. So, look, he can play some guard. This is where you have to say, okay, this is your evaluation. I'm not going to pretend to be, silly and say, oh, I think you should be a tackle or a guard. That's up to them. But, yeah, this is where it'll be interesting. And it's so fascinating because, this is the team that had Brandon Scherff, that had Sam Cosmi, and ultimately had to move them inside. If that's the case, at the third round, that's hardly a big deal. It's just that right now for this team, left tackle is such a question mark. And not that I would expect Coleman to start, maybe not even until midway through the season, but if even then. But if he's ultimately proven to be more of a guard, if that's where they come out of, the summer thinking, then, yeah, that left tackle spot is even more in question for some. I mean, I'm not as fretting about it as others, though I understand the Jaden Daniels part of it. But, yeah, that's going to be really fascinating to see if they're right on their evaluation that he is a tackle ultimately.
If Scherff was first and Cosmi was second, maybe third time's the charm, Ben. I think after all that we've been through, to take this conversation full circle, we deserve that. We deserve a left tackle.
Oh, boy, I think we deserve a little more than that. I like to think we deserve Hawaii, but okay, I guess we can take the left tackle, sure.
We'll take what they give us, man, considering all that we've been through. Ben Standig covered it all for The Athletic. Great stuff, as always, man. I hope you get a little bit of rest between having to call into our shows and whatever your bosses at The Athletic have you doing. And we'll see you in a couple weeks for rookie minicamp and OTAs. It'll be here before we want it to be.
Absolutely. Craig, appreciate it, man. We'll talk soon.
Absolutely. That's Ben Standig, everybody. And, of course, you can also check out his podcast, Standig Room Only, wherever you get your pods.
This is the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.